Trae. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. And
Excellent.
we were just talking a little bit before the show of how I've just really experienced your amazing photography, not realizing you had this really deep story. Tell us about it from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, where to begin? I can go. I can go back as far as I want, but I'll say that right now I'm holding a photo exhibition. So that's kind of where I've kind of gotten to today. But reeling back from that, this photo exhibition is kind of a byproduct of my brother's work and my work. And my brother was a photojournalist in Yemen during the Arab Spring from 2011 to 2013. And my work from the 2020 protests amid George Floyd's murder, recorded murder. And so what makes this exhibition particularly near and dear to the heart is, I've been showing my brother's work for years now, and that's due to the fact that he was killed in Yemen in 2014. So this exhibition is the first time I'm actually showing my work, and I thought it was kind of a wonderful reason to maybe combine both worlds, not just to put my work alongside my brother's for any reason in particular, but really to combine kind of two cultural vantage points, like two different paradigms, but also showing kind of like the very similar struggle in terms of racial oppression, systematic oppression, and economic oppression. So that's what the exhibition represents. And I can kind of tell that of course I want to tell more of the story of my brother and where it all kind of came to be. But where would you like me to start with this?
Well, I think you have some really great photos here of some of the earlier days, right?
Yeah,
You
for
and your
sure.
brother, your mother as well. So we can kind of start there because
Yeah.
obviously it was already clear to me, sometimes you have siblings and you're not that connected. It
Right.
was not the case with you and your brother. It looked like you
Oh, for
guys
sure.
actually had a really close relationship.
Yeah. I mean, as close as can be, which just adds to the kind of the intensity of this whole situation and life as I know it. But yeah, so it was just my mom, brother, and I growing up together. We were born in England, actually, and my mother took my brother and I to America at about 2.5 years. I was 2.5. My brother was 7. So she took us away from our fathers for certain reasons and to be closer with our grandparents. So, and I'll say that it was kind of like an on-off switch was flipped when we came to the States. Life seemed to kind of be an uphill battle ever since moving from England. Because when you're talking about a single mom raising 2 sons with kind of bohemian kind of dispositions and whatnot, America sometimes isn't the most forgiving place. So welfare, food stamps, Section 8, coupon cutting, all that kind of stuff. That was part of the vocabulary growing up. And then you reach a certain point in adolescence when you're like, oh, this isn't a ubiquitous commonplace thing. This is like a kind of a unique situation. And then you start kind of processing that and dealing with the insecurities and all those kinds of things that come with just living in it, kind of what felt like kind of a decent, simple life, but also when you realize what's possible, just what the American dream is supposed to represent. But amid all that, just being us three, we kind of held each other up. We would take advantage of the little, the little extra money coming our way, or little trips that came our way, or something, and we'd just be silly, because I think silliness is a way to kind of offset the doom and gloom of just kind of the intensity of the whole situation as a whole. So we kind of had that the three of us really had that pact growing up, my brother especially, and Luke kind of growing up, he was one of those kind of nocturnal beings. He was one of those people who wouldn't go to bed until like 4 or 5 every night, and he would be left to his own devices, kind of. And this is where he'd be really tapping in. This is where he would get to know like the ins and outs of subcultures. Like you could quiz him on any question about basketball, about boxing, about hip hop music. He knew everything,
Wow.
about foreign film, and he kind of brought that in to the way he experienced life.
Well,
you
that's
know.
so beautiful too. And I
Yeah.
mean, when you're talking about, his experiences, clearly there was something in his path that also led him into photography and kind of the
Mm,
journalistic style of photography. And that also took him to Yemen, correct?
that's right.
So
Yeah.
tell us a bit about that transition in terms of his connection to, kind of photojournalism and sharing stories in that way, utilizing his camera to be kind of that conduit of how he, really saw the world.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I'll just say before he went to Yemen, the last time I saw him was I was in Peace Corps in Nicaragua, and I visited my mom and brother for Christmas, and he gifted me a camera, which was the last time I saw him before he went
Wow.
off to Yemen 2 months later, and he kind of got the ball rolling for me on that front. He knew I liked photography, and but he was never abrasive with it. He knew that everyone was operated on their own time, but he said, "Hey, play with this, Jordan, see where it goes." So yeah, so then I saw him off, and then he went to Yemen, and of course, how could you not be excited for him? Because this was a place that was near and dear to his heart, and he was infatuated with the cultural history of Yemen and the Middle East in general, but Yemen specifically with its kind of like its rich, kind of deep connections to Islam, to Prophet Muhammad, to just like really like kind of an origin of so much kind of what the Middle East represents, kind of originating from that region. Um, so Luke went there just to be. He didn't go there with any agenda. He didn't want to. He didn't have any political purpose to serve. He got there by virtue of being a teacher at an all-girls school to teach English. And being a teacher probably wasn't his biggest strong suit because that required being very organized. Yeah, and so I think being a teacher, he would bring his A game, but it was also an interesting position for him to be in because that just the educational sector meant a lot of kind of different kind of expectations
Yeah.
and pressures and all that kind of stuff. So meanwhile, he gets caught up in the Arab Spring. And for anyone who doesn't know what the Arab Spring was, it was just a series of anti-government protests that kind of just kind of spread all throughout the Middle East. And the Arab Spring in Yemen just so happened to start basically like 2 weeks into Luke arriving in Yemen. So naturally, Luke just kind of gravitated to the streets every day. And he was one of those people that he would kind of distance himself from the foreigners, from the expats. He just lived with the protesters in the camps in what they called Tent City. So he was just there. He was just living his life, just engaging in conversation all day, every day, smoking cigarettes with them, just kind of hanging out. But being the gifted photographer and writer and everything that he was, he found himself working for a Yemen English-speaking newspaper in Yemen. And then before he knew it, he was freelancing for BBC, for Al Jazeera, for New York Times, for NPR. And the beautiful thing about this whole experience is you can see however conscious or unconscious of it he was, he just wanted to show Yemen in a good light because all we saw over here was war, terrorism, Al Qaeda, things like that. So Luke made a point to just do all the cultural kind of happenings, like youth bowling tournaments. I mean, he went to the Somali refugee crisis, which is hardly covered. Just a plethora of beautiful happenings that represent what Yemen's all about, what we don't really see. So he was actually providing glimpses of that reality through his work.
I just gotta say here too, Jordan, his photography work was spot on phenomenal.
Oof.
I mean, there was something very crystal clear, even in the images you shared with me. I know we only have 3 of them here, but my goodness, like I said, his perspective and his eye, this is so key in photography. Anybody can have an amazing camera and take a sharp image, but there's really something special about his approach and his portrayal, exactly what you're talking about, of this rich cultural vibrancy that was there. I could feel that through the photographs you shared with me.
For sure. Yeah, no, he was in it. He was, and this is where I can kind of relate to him of my experience, in the following years. But when you're just in it, you're in it. There's nowhere else you'd rather be. You're just kind of connected to the source, and this is what kind of sparks you. This is what makes you feel alive when you see kind of community coming together for a fight that's something that just kind of transcends what we know to be true on the daily grind. So yeah, so his work was just, it was just the tip of the iceberg for him, you know, because he was just getting started. And that's the beautiful thing, but it's also the tragic thing, because there was no telling what lengths he was going to be able to go to, just by virtue of being him, just by virtue of being able to show up in any particular situation and adjusting his kind of plane to really being able to kind of connect with people and make people feel heard and represented. And the common thing you'd hear, because I've met a lot of people who knew Luke in Yemen, or people who've just talked about him in Yemen, but they just said Luke was Yemeni. He wasn't American. But that was kind of a testament to, Luke wasn't a big fan of labels in general. You know, I think one of his students at one time asked, you know, he was born in England, but he grew up in America. So what does he associate with? And he said, neither. Like, this planet is my country, kind of thing, you know? Yeah. So it's that whole, just being able to completely immerse yourself into whatever environment you are. And Yemen just happened to be that place that he kind of ended up in the end, with so many kind of precursors leading up to that, you know. I mean, living in Trenchtown in Jamaica, you know, fishing boats in Alaska, you know, living in Egypt, you know, and not really having a plan B, just kind of living on rooftops and stuff. And so just integrating with the community in those ways and embracing discomfort, you know, and in that ability to embrace the comfort within the discomfort, he was able to capture what I think is such a rare and beautiful kind of essence of life that that happens all the time, that we just got to be perceptive to it, you know.
I gotta say, this is such a great setup. I mean, after this break, we're gonna dive into some of how that story evolved with your brother in Yemen, and clearly there was some things you really learned throughout that process. And I just, even through the photos, I could see how you and your mother were still just like holding each other up in these moments. You guys, this conversation is going to continue with me and Jordan Summers right after this short break. I'm telling you, you want to stay tuned and hear how this story evolves right after this. Stay tuned. You're watching The Day with Trae. Hey there, it's Trae Holiday. And of course, Besa and I had to take a trip back to Market Street Shoes to grab some items. They always know what to show us. And let me tell you, we both spent quality time to be sure we collected some amazing additions to our wardrobes. They have some of the most unique bags, shoes, and accessories. I mean, the whole shebang. It's always a good time when I get to shop with my girl Besa. Make sure you go check out Market Street Shoes, y'all, and you too can walk out with some dope gear.
The truth with proof, the truth with proof. If you nice with the sports, then he swooping through. He gon' highlight you. Ain't nobody live like us, fly like us. We gon' find you, put the city behind you. Let us know you got skills, we gon' be at a game. In the Northwest, we reppin' the city where it rains.
Grand Rising, and welcome back, everybody, to The Day with Trae. Of course, you guys gotta check out my brother, The Truth or Proof, tonight, happening right here on Converge Media. I actually really love his commercial, and personally, I love the cartoon floating up at the end. It is so proof. Anyways, welcome back. As I've been talking to Jordan Summers about, you know, his history and his brother being an amazing photographer, gifting him with his first camera, and then him kind of picking up the legacy. But we really ended there where it's like you were showcasing how, you know, your brother Luke was embodied in the culture. He was, you know, like they said, he was Yemeni. I mean, they didn't know any difference because he wasn't toting around some American flag with him. He was really a part of the people and really understood the beauty of the culture there. And so through his work as a photojournalist, he found himself in a lot of different spaces, right, while he was in Yemen.
Oh yeah, I mean, he was he was all over the country basically. And like I said, I mean, even just kind of on the border, one of the big crises was a Somalian refugee crisis. And this is another thing that's just not televised or just not recorded at all. But I mean, people are actually, I mean, conditions were so bad in Somalia that they were emigrating to Yemen for a brighter future, not really understanding how much in turmoil kind of Yemen was already in and becoming. So he would make a point to just kind of put himself out there and spend time with these people who Luke, and I just can kind of envision they would just be instant friends. They would just hit it off, and they would just have these shared connections. So the rate at which Luke had to go through this was speaking to his heart. But I also knew that it like broke him down every single time as well, because you're just on to the next thing, and you have that luxury, if you will, to be able to kind of come back to a base point kind of thing. So I think Luke, when it came to the morality of photojournalism, being someone so like insightful and curious and sensitive, I think that kind of messed with him quite a bit, because life was so kind of tricky in that way, just to try to make sense of things and just to try to truly experience and feel, what you're feeling in a place like Yemen, so kind of detached from what you grew up to know. So Luke was engaged in that to a large degree. There was even a national dialogue conference, which, ambassadors from different countries came together, and they kind of spoke to peace, like different tribes would come together to kind of try to settle disputes and try to kind of find some sort of happy medium and understanding. So Luke was a translator for that. He was a photographer for that, of course, but he was everywhere, so he was doing his thing. And again, he kept away from the limelight. He kept away from people who were trying to turn something out of, trying to make Yemen seem something that it was not, So throughout that whole process, Mom and I were talking to him quite a bit. He would even send us his photos, say, "What do you think, Jordan?" Like, "Hey, Jay, like, what do you think of this?" and all that kind of stuff. And he would always be eagerly kind of sharing and that kind of stuff. And he was planning on coming home soon too. Like, he was really kind of craving being with Mom, because, he just, we always want to give her as much support as we can. Yeah. And, he was already bought some clothes to send him back and everything. And he was asking if I'd pick him up at the airport and all that kind of stuff. So even though even though he was still doing his thing in Yemen, still doing reports, still doing stories, still hanging with the protesters every single day, going to weddings, all these beautiful things, he was ready to come home. And I'm not sure if it's the best time to go into it, right now. But yeah, he was. So we got a call, and this was September 2013, that Luke had gone missing. And then a couple of days later, we found out that he was abducted by an armed tribesman. And this was just on a busy street that he went shopping all the time. He came out of the grocery store. People just brought him into a truck, drove off. And so thus began the saga. Mom and I, we don't have any other family really. So it was just us two working with the FBI. So FBI showing up to our house, hours and hours of probing and collecting things. And from the get-go, it was just upsetting. They gave us these really kind of beaten up recorders to use if anyone called. And it's like these recorders hadn't been used in like 10, I could already see from the very beginning, like through the veil of them pretending to work in our interests, but not really. But I was so clouded in fear and everything that all I could do was be subservient to what the FBI was saying. And for 8 months, we didn't even know if Luke was alive. They would report to us. We had a victims outreach coordinator who was supposed to be our liaison, like the person of comfort, kind of updating us. But this woman, it was a traumatic experience in her own right. You wouldn't even want this woman serving you at McDonald's, let alone being your victims outreach coordinator. But 8 months later, we get a video, and it's a plea video, and there's Luke looking a little disheveled, but he's all right. So we kind of rest assured that, all right, Luke's still, he's good. He doesn't look too healthy or anything, but he's alive. And we asked how they got the video, the FBI, and they said confidential, but we have our sources in the field. And then, so that was 8 months after he was abducted. And meanwhile, the FBI is telling us, try not to tell any of your friends or loved ones or anyone, because we don't want the captors to do something that they otherwise wouldn't do if, it goes global and all that kind of stuff. So they were kind of giving us these scare tactics the whole time. And Mom and I, not being the most squeaky wheel, gets the grease kind of people, we were just kind of like, okay. And just trying to keep things a secret while I was working at a corporate job, taking care of Mom, still trying to enjoy my life too, assuming that everything would be okay. Words of the FBI saying, just an armed tribe. This stuff kind of happens frequently. Don't worry about it. We'll get Luke home, And then more months passed of just like nothing, and just being utterly just overwhelmed and terrified. And we finally got a second video of Luke, and he looked a lot better this time. And this was in November, just before Thanksgiving of 2014. And he actually looked better. You know, he had his glasses, he looked clean cut, he had a purple shirt on. He looked good. And he basically just made an announcement that it's been a year since he's been kidnapped at this point.
Wow.
And but our hope was restored anyway. But then one day I'm at work on the computer, and I see failed American raid, or they freed a bunch of hostages, but they missed their main target, which was an American citizen. And I was like, huh? So I called our contact, the FBI. He said, no, don't worry. It's a different thing. Don't worry about it. And then hours later, he calls back and said, hey, sorry, Jordan, I wasn't authorized to tell you, but yeah, we went in for Luke and we missed him by a day. Wow. Like, huh? So this was like maybe a day or two before Thanksgiving. So then Thanksgiving sits, and it's just kind of me and mom sitting there, and we're just, and we had a couple friends over, but it was just dark, and we weren't really sure what to do. And of course, FBI meanwhile says, don't worry, we have no reason to believe that this changes the trajectory of anything. And then within a week, a video goes viral of my brother with his head shaved, in that same purple shirt where he looked good, just a month and a half prior. And he's just at an outdoor location looking really like, you could tell that he was worrying so much about me and mom, and the fact that he had to be in that position for us to see him like that was just dreadful. And we found out at that point that he was being held by Al-Qaeda. And basically the captors said, Luke has 3 days to live, and unless our demands are met. He will meet his inevitable fate unless demands are met. To this day, mom and I never heard any demands. The government said, sorry, Jordan, we don't have any. They never told us any demands. Sorry, nothing else we can say. And so after more probing, nothing. They wouldn't give us anything. So after that, my playbook with the government just flew out the window, and I was just connecting with journalists, with third-party organizations, and already at this point, media is hounding me. You were getting calls from Q13, from CNN. Hey, Jordan, just want to see if this is real, and blah, blah, and they're getting in the way of me trying to call people to save my brother. And this is media just like harassing me already. And, I had an appointment to go meet Secretary of Defense John Kerry the next week, and all those kinds of things. And then so no sleep, no eating, nothing, just up around the clock, just working with the embassy, working with all these people, just trying to buy time. And then it comes down to like the second night, just we hear loud thuds on the door, and we open the door, and it's like these four dreary looking FBI guys, people that come in, and mom slowly makes her way down the stairs, and I'm kind of coming to the slow realization, why are they here? And I asked if it was bad, and then they just kind of shake their heads. And I asked if it was really bad, they shake their heads. And then mom joins us, and then the woman told us, sorry, Luke was killed in a failed second raid. Neither of these raids were brought to our attention. And, of course, mom crumples and I crumple with her, and then they're just hovering over us for a while, and then they leave. And that was that. That was, and then, yeah, so, and then literally the next day, Obama gives us a call expressing his condolences. And for the next several months, it was just mom and I trying to do anything, trying to eat, trying to say all those kinds of things. We were just trying to cope, just trying to live. And that's kind of in a nutshell, that's how it all went down. And I had my first meeting with Obama it was I think it was in March of 2015. I demanded that we talk to him. I didn't even really know what to say, but they said, okay, we'll make it happen. So it was just me, mom, Obama, and his secretary sitting in a room for like a maybe a half hour. And I was just rattling off like how much Luke meant to me. I was also rattling off what's their foreign policy, how is it going to change? And Obama just kind of giving me what he typically gives. He sounded endearing, like he cared. He said he'd move heaven and earth if it were his daughters. But like, okay, what does that do for me? What does that do for Luke? You know, because he wasn't one of your daughters, and if he was, he would have been okay, kind of thing. And then we started kind of connecting with more hostage families. They invited us to DC with more frequency, because this was happening a lot. You know, you remember if you recall, the ISIS beheadings and all of those. We started meeting all of those families. And that in and of itself was very, very traumatic, because at first glance you think, hey, we have these people we can relate with, something horrible. But it also just kind of revealed still some sort of like class system, because it seemed Mom and I, we kind of felt like we were just in the corner, kind of like we didn't have, it seemed like many others did, and not really wanting to take away at all what they had to go through, because they're all going through it regardless. But it felt like we just didn't have the resources, the monetary resources to start any kind of foundations, or to just to put our money where our mouth was, you know, and do what all these other people are doing. So you start feeling grief of like, oh wait, should we do a foundation for, you know, not really knowing what to do. So it was this whole process of just like trying to find any kind of way while in the lion's den of DC, not wanting to have anything to do with any of it, while still feeling a need to be part of it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this is, my gosh, Jordan, this, you know, again, here I am, you know, you're coming to these events, you're taking photos of us, and I had no idea that you and your mother and really your brother had just experienced this. And it really was so eye-opening to me. This is why I just wanted to give you that time to really take us through all that you all experienced, because this is a story that is often never told. We never get to really hear from the families of victims overseas and in these other countries that are really unfortunately wound up in something that has nothing to do with them. And it's this country to country versus country thing that then your family got wound up in. And you know, great. They invited you to the White House. You said you demanded it. So it wasn't even like they said, look, come, we need to personally give you condolences. So that's kind of another check mark here, where it's like, come on, where was our bedside manner? A phone call is not going to do it when you lose a loved one, particularly when there are so many details that you don't have, right? But I appreciate you for being willing to share this, because honestly, I don't know that I've ever really heard like, hey, this is exactly what my family went through. Detail by detail, day by day, we were doing this and trying to, again, work with the system that's in place. Like you said, you and your mom weren't like, wait a minute, are you sure that you just were like, okay, tell us something, give us some type of information here. But one of the things that I just really appreciate about what you've done is you've said, you know what, my brother gave me that camera. I'm now going to find my way of utilizing pictures to tell stories. And you've been doing an amazing job of that, which I know this exhibition really showcases. We showed some of Luke's photos, but you also have some photos. And very similarly, you find yourself in the CHOP. You hear these national and international stories going on about Seattle. But for many of us that were on the ground, we were experiencing something that was very different than what was being reported. And it was imperative that we had live streams like what Converge was doing, that we have the photos of what you were actually seeing out there on the ground to really help tell this story. Tell us a bit about how you really decided on your own, like, I need to now pick up this torch and carry on this level of work, very much what your brother was doing out there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's imperative to see the silver linings. Like, no matter how unfathomable a situation is, you know, there's always that kind of beauty to be found in the rubble, right? So it's like trying to extract that. And for me, coming out of this, it's been a whole process. You know, I was, like I mentioned earlier, I was working a corporate job, but I just stopped showing up. They got me to come back, but then when you're just in complete self-preservation due to trauma, it becomes very apparent what your needs are, you know, and what you don't need to be, you know, just kind of associating with. And that was a lot for me. It was a lot, because I associated so much of my past life with Luke getting killed, because I was still trying to lead a normal life for like 15 months. So even just watching a movie or going out for a drink, I didn't want to do any of that because I felt like I wasn't doing what I needed to be doing or something, in honor of my brother. So instead, I just, it was a kind of a unique situation. I mean, you can go a lot of ways after going through something like this, but I was fortunate enough, I think, to have some sort of resources in people that kind of pulled me up from the trenches. But I did a lot of yoga. I did a lot of meditation. I'd start going to psychology classes just to understand how PTSD like really works in the brain and like how deep it like permeates into your being. So went down this rabbit hole of just complete kind of rediscovery. And throughout that whole process, just being on unemployment, working little odd jobs, and taking care of mom, and then just trying to travel when granted the opportunity. So I did that for several years. But then this program at Seattle Central opened up, which was the visual media program, and it was all things photo and video, and it just looked like kind of a plunge into a new direction. But I knew it would be good to kind of reinsert myself into society a little bit and kind of maybe reintroduce a bit of structure into my life. And the academic setting is really good at that, just by virtue of showing up every single day, for something. So I started going to Seattle Central with a kind of a notion that, photojournalism is where it's at. I'm not really too sure. I've done event photography, things like that, and just like travel photography. But naturally, I went to school from 2019 to 2021. Little did any of us know that it would be, arguably the most intense time of our lives. The pandemic hit. So all of a sudden everything was remote. And then subsequently George Floyd's murder, in wake of all the other murders that are happening every single day. But that was the boiling point. So all of a sudden I kind of start, I'm still in school, but it's remote. So my energy isn't so invested in that as it is everything that's happening out here, and then before I know it, I'm placing more attention out here than I am at school. But with the notion of like, this is school. This is the biggest educational experience for any of us, and I think my teachers got that, and they just kind of let me get free rein a little bit. So this was the first time I felt like one of the first times feeling like really a deep connection to my brother, and how just this is nowhere else I'd rather be. Like all of a sudden I'm on the front lines every day. That's where I saw Omari, like maybe like the third day or something of the protest, like early June. I think it was the protest day after kind of Armageddon in downtown Seattle. So I remember seeing him doing his thing, but not knowing who he was and everything. But we were all joined in this effort, and to feel Luke through that experience, because this is what he was doing, right? He was just in it, no questions asked. This is just where you want to be. And to think of how imperative it is to put yourself in this situation, if you're able to, if you have the means to like you said earlier, like we're presented a package of what's going on, right? Whether it's in Yemen or whether it's in Seattle, we all saw what was being broadcasted with CHOP, with the protests. But when you're in it every single day, you get to lift that veil back a little bit. You get to see things for your own eyes, as opposed to like a packaged veil that's given to you. You get to kind of experience life on the streets for how it truly is, and you get to kind of acknowledge like the deep implications of social, of economic, of racial oppression. So to be in that and to feel that and to feel connected in that was just what it was all about for me. Like I said, there was no place else I'd rather be, and that was like and it continues to be like my divine connection, kind of to the source, in being able to connect with people through such adversity, but also the beauty that comes out of this adversity, right? So that's kind of my thing, as someone who understands to a very fine degree what trauma really entails. Being able to bond with others in their collective trauma, just by virtue of being from a certain, racial class or socioeconomic class or something, just being marginalized, and that just not having much attention on it because it's just this, it's all kind of glossed over, So I found it particularly like grounding to be with people who got it, who really understood. They didn't need to know my story necessarily, but people got it, But I think on top of that, not wanting to digress too much, it's like realizing that these traumas, as much as they bring us together, I feel like they're used against us by the system as well. Like they're exploited. I think if we're not kind of tapping into what it is we need to be doing for ourselves, then there's a chance that this system that feeds off of kind of power, that feeds off of adversity, that feeds off of us kind of fighting each other in the trenches, basically, then it's kind of difficult to see your way out of it. So I think experiencing what I've experienced, not just with the George Floyd protests and CHOP, but the protests I was kind of with for the next year and a half, you see that there's so much more work that always needs to be done, and what we're up against, whether it's in Yemen or whether it's in Seattle, the fabric of our being, it's like, it's very similar. So it's like we come together in this kind of join trauma, but we also need to kind of look inward as well in that process, as to really kind of truly kind of represent what it is we're fighting for.
Absolutely. I mean, this is exactly why. I mean, I just wanted to show your photos again, because I think when you were describing it, and really the fact that you've put this exhibition together, that's a blend of these two stories that share so many similar characteristics. And yet, if we did not have these examples, maybe we wouldn't really be able to draw the connections. So I appreciate that you've now taken your brother's experience and your experience and really combined it. Of course, we went over time, but it was so necessary to have this discussion, Jordan, today. And I really appreciate you for, really just being your authentic self, coming here and sharing with us, because this is beyond inspiring what you've been able to do and how you're really taking on and picking up the torch. But you too have a great camera eye, a great photographic eye, right? And so I know your brother would be so proud of where you are today. And, you being a part of this Converge family, I get to experience your photo greatness all the time that you're out there, and just appreciate what you bring to these events and what you brought really to this exhibit, so we could really understand the juxtaposition between what was going on there in Yemen while your brother was there, and how it connects so much to this Seattle story that you were definitely a part of. So before I let you go, you got to look right there in the camera. Let folks know how they can come and check out this amazing exhibition that you put together.
Yeah, thanks so much, Trae, for your words. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So the exhibition, and I'll just say, just kind of on top of that, I mean, there's so many layers, and in seeing this exhibition, you not only get to see kind of two worlds, but you also get to know my brother in this exhibition as well, because there's a section for him, and it's getting to know my brother is a beautiful thing for me, of course, but it's also so emblematic of what Luke represents in living your truth and living an authentic life and being curious and giving people the benefit of the doubt, so and trying to live a life devoid of labels when it comes to politicizing things, so when you go to this exhibition, I think you're going to feel a lot of that. And the exhibition is Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. It's at the M. Rosetta Hunter Gallery in Seattle Central College. So it goes through August 18th. So you have a few more weeks to go. Again, that's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I'll be there, off and on. So I would love to see you guys there in person. It makes it all the more meaningful for me. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there who can attend.
Wow. What time is it open?
So Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and on Thursdays, 10 a.m. to 6. So there's some more wiggle room on Thursday.
All right.
Yeah.
Right on. Jordan Summers, I can't thank you enough. And it's been so phenomenal to get to know you deeper and understand your story even more. I just really appreciate you for being here and sharing it with us. I think you and I could have talked for at least 2 hours
just getting
beyond,
started.
right? But I really appreciate you giving us a kind of compact story here today to share with the audience, because wow, what you and your mother experienced, I can't even imagine. And so my heart goes out to you and your mom. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks so much, Trae.
Absolutely. You guys, when I tell you,